Today we're talking about the Punisher films. This is a series of films starring the Marvel character Frank Castle, aka the Punisher. There have been 3 films so far released theatrically, and all of them have their merits and their downsides as well. I don't think any of the films are particularly great, but I do think they're all rather interesting. So without further ado, I figure I'll give you guys my ranking of the Punisher films from worst to best. Coming in last place would have to be 2008's Punisher Warzone. I actually rather do enjoy this film. It's crazy, it's over the top. It actually stars Ray Stevenson, who sadly passed away recently as Punisher. He's a pretty damn good Frank Castle, and this film is essentially a soft reboot. It feels kind of like an 80s action movie. It actually has Jigsaw as the villain, not to be confused with the villain from the Saw movies, but the comic book character Jigsaw. And he's pretty goofy and fun and over the top. But ultimately, the film kind of feels more like a comedy than it does a serious movie. It's so over the top and crazy and gory that it's kind of hard to take serious. A fun film, but very tongue-in-cheek, and one that I don't find myself rewatching that often, but not bad. If you want a crazy good time, watch Punisher Warzone. Up next, we have 2004's The Punisher, starring Thomas Jane and John Travolta. This is actually the extended edition of the movie, and the one that I recommend more. The story's more complex. It's actually more grittier, a little bit more violent. Not much more, but there's a few more gory kills in the film. Unfortunately, this version has only ever been released on DVD. I think there might be like a foreign Blu-ray, but I think only in the States this is all we've gotten. The Blu-ray is nice and has good picture quality, but unfortunately, if you want the better version of the movie, it's only available on standard DVD. Still very entertaining. Either way, I wish this would get a Blu-ray release one day or maybe a 4K release, but still an awesome version of the film. This film essentially shows Frank Castle become the Punisher after his family is brutally murdered by Howard Saint, played by John Travolta. Thomas Jane is great in this movie as the Punisher. He really gives it his all, and I actually think that he might be the best casting as the Punisher. The only thing that really holds this movie back for the number 1 spot for me is that it's not quite intense enough. Like, I do think when the action is hitting and firing on all cylinders, it's a good time, but it's not nearly as crazy and over the top as the film that came before it, or the film that came after it. But it is a more coherent story. The other two are a little bit choppy in their execution, and this is more or less the definitive version, the Punisher origin story. However, I think it could have used a little bit more action, and I do like this movie, but it does kind of lack some of the punch that I think it could have had. An entertaining origin story, but not quite as intense as I would have liked it to be. Which leads me to number 1, 1989's The Punisher, starring Dolph Lundgren and Lou Gossett Jr. Now, this is most people's least favorite, and a lot of people don't really care for this one, but I really love this movie. It is a crazy 80s action film starring Dolph Lundgren as our titular hero, Frank Castle, aka The Punisher. This version of The Punisher is just strange. He not only does not wear the skull jacket on his chest, mostly because Marvel didn't want them to have the character too accurate to the comics, which is so weird. Nowadays, it's the complete opposite. Also, the character dwells in the sewers. He has like a subterranean lair, and he comes out at night and he shoots bad guys and fights the mob and the Yakuza. It's a really crazy and over-the-top take on the Punisher, and one that I just really love. It's definitely not the most comic accurate, I will absolutely admit that, but it's the one that I find the most entertaining. Plus, the performances in the movie are really good. For instance, Lou Gossett Jr. really is giving it his all. That's Frank's former partner, because Frank is shown to be something of a cop before he becomes the Punisher. And, the origin is basically briefly swept over this time around. They don't really delve into how he became the Punisher. Just brief flashbacks here and there. It's mostly just about him taking on the Mafia and the Yakuza at the same time, and pitting the two organizations against each other. It's a fun, crazy 80s action film that people sadly overlook all the time. I think mostly what hurt the film, at least in '89, around the time of Batman and other big, huge blockbusters, so it didn't really stand a chance at the box office. If you ever wanted to see Dolph Lundgren as Frank Castle kicking ass and taking names, this is the one for you. Definitely an unconventional choice, I will not lie, but without a doubt, my absolute favorite of the Punisher series. Check it out and watch this movie. That's my list. There was also a really badass Punisher video game that came out around the time of the Thomas Jane movie. It actually has Thomas Jane doing the voice of Frank Castle in the game, and it is a really hardcore, badass game that lets you shoot and beat up and brutalize criminals as well as torture them. That's right, you can actually torture people in this game to get information. You can either choose to take it all the way and kill them with the torture, or stop before you take their life in order to get better rating and, I guess you could say, better karma for Frank Castle. It's a brutal game, definitely not for kids, but it's one that I actually really love. If you're 17 or older, I highly recommend the Punisher game, but it's not for the faint of heart, but it is really badass, and it's a game that I love very much. The Punisher, it's awesome, it's backwards compatible on 360, and it's also available on the PC and the PS2. If you love good shooting and badass action, check this game out. Well, that's my list. I thank y'all for watching, and if you'd like, leave your list down below, and peace out.